Okay, welcome Year 11 to this lesson on symbolism in Lord of the Flies. So this is in preparation, of course, for your GCSE English Literature exam and in particular your upcoming mock exam where you'll get a question on Lord of the Flies. As you know, the Lord of the Flies question in the exam, there is a choice of 2 questions. They tend to cover symbol, theme, character in some way. So symbolism is of the utmost importance when you are revising for this exam. Okay, so as you can see from the images, we're going to look at 3 in particular. And but there are many more to think about, and I will be touching upon those as well. So it's a lot of it will of course be me guiding you through, but there will be some tasks involved that you should go away and continue to do as your own independent revision. Okay, so thinking about symbolism, we have to think about what a symbol actually is first of all. And so I've included an image here of an array of symbols that you might associate with a science lesson. You might have seen them in a science lab or during a lesson at school, and they are all symbols. They are all symbols which tell us a certain instruction in this case, or a symbol that tells us something with a deeper meaning, okay, and that visual image is there to represent something with a much deeper meaning. Now, the purpose of including that is just to show you how symbols are around us all the time, in all aspects of our lives, so much so that we don't even notice them. But Golding did something in particular with symbols in his novel. Okay, so he hides some pretty powerful messages in some pretty unlikely places all the way through his novel. It's particularly heavy in terms of symbolism. So we are going to explore 3 in detail, but there are several more to discover. And if we look at that dictionary and literary definitions to give us a better idea. So the use of symbols represent ideas or qualities, but particularly in literary terms, symbols can be objects, they can be characters, figures, and even colours that are used to represent abstract ideas or concepts. And if we look even closer, the actions of a character, word or action or event that have a deeper meaning in the context of the whole story, and that's what we need to consider. Symbols are not just something we need to learn and revise in Lord of the Flies. We need to consider their deeper meaning and what Golding is trying to show us through these symbols, and see them as almost like hidden messages to us. And from that definition, we can see objects like the conch, which we'll look at today. We can see characters. You could, of course, argue that someone like Simon is a symbol through the novel, and we'll touch on that, as well as kind of ideas itself, such as the beast in the novel, is a really important symbol. So there's a task here for you to write your own definition, which would be useful. It's always better to put it into your own words. And just remind yourselves of the importance of these symbols. Again, it's not a tick box task. It's not about you just learning the symbols by rote. It's about you understanding what they represent and their significance in the whole story and the context of the story. So we're going to look at the conch, as I've mentioned, the beast, and also physical appearance. Okay, so that is shown by the three images at the start. We're going to look at the beast first of all, and I've included some questions that have appeared on past exam papers, for Lord of the Flies. So possible questions linked to the beast, and they may be worded differently, but they may come up in this form, and we need to be prepared for that. So what is the importance of the beast in Lord of the Flies? How does Golding use the beast to explore ideas about fear in Lord of the Flies? Simon insists that the beast is only us. How does Golding present ideas about mankind in Lord of the Flies? And finally, how does Golding use the beast to explore ideas about violence? So I've highlighted that certain words in those questions, as we would always encourage you to do when you're looking at an exam question, but it also gives us some insight in those words of the meaning behind the symbol of the beast. Okay, and it's a really complex symbol, no least because it is an ever-changing symbol, and it's not just any one object in the story. But if we have a look at the words in bold, we've got fear, we've got ideas about mankind in general, and we've got violence. So the image on this slide should also jog your memory of the impact this beast or beastly presence or figure that they have nightmares about and worry about and cause anxiety and conflict. This has such a strong impact on these boys and a strong impact on driving this plot forward. So to understand Lord of the Flies really needs you to understand what the beast is and what it represents to the boys on the island. Okay, so I said earlier that it's a symbol that evolves, it's ever changing, it's no one thing. Okay, the beast cannot be classified as just one thing. So it's an ever-changing symbol in the novel. It's first mentioned in hushed tones by some of the younger boys, the unnamed boys, who call it a beastie in chapter 2. And at this point, the boys have absolutely no idea what this could be, but of course it's a source of fear. By chapter 6, it is even more so a source of fear, but it becomes a more realistic threat. Still something that they know very little about, but when Sam and Eric see a silhouette and think it is the beast, it becomes a very real threat to the boys and something which some of the boys feel that they must act upon to conquer or attack. However, we as readers are in a unique position. We know more than the boys at this point. We know that the silhouette that they've seen is the body of a dead parachutist. So we then are able to see that perhaps the beast isn't something real, perhaps the beast is something that is within their imagination, and it's the fear in their imaginations. So one of the predominant interpretations of the text is that there actually isn't a beast at all, and you guys will know that having read the novel quite a few times already. The beast is something that is within each of the boys, regardless of what your individual argument will be. The beast is definitely something which impacts all of the boys on that island, okay? Whether it's an abstract idea or something more real, it is definitely within each of the boys and changes the way quite a few of the boys in the novel behave. Perhaps thinking about the writer, always we want to connect our ideas to the writer's ideas. Perhaps Golding wants the reader to see that the beast is lurking within all of us. And when we say the beast, we're thinking there about something more abstract and something more symbolic, something that's lurking within us, like fear, like a desire that perhaps we don't let out very often, and perhaps it is fear that prevents it from coming out. So again, the beast is a really complex idea rather than a physical thing. Remember, of course, that we have to understand the writer's ideas in terms of the context of when he was writing and what he may have experienced. And so we need to recognise that Golding served in World War II, and he had that experience to see that the worst in human nature often does prevail. He saw that in his experiences of war, in his experiences through life. He chose then, after those experiences, to write a realistic tale about how the civilized can quickly revert to something much darker. So again, the beast and this idea of it lurking within all of us really links quite well to our understanding of Golding and his experiences. So the next slide is something that I want you to perhaps use as a revision tool going forward. Okay, so it's really important that you find ways to access your revision of Lord of the Flies, and you won't necessarily always have time to read the book in full, okay? And that's not even necessarily the most effective way of you revising up until your exams in the summer. So what you can do is use a symbol or a character or a theme, and you can track that through the novel, because as a byproduct of that, you will be refreshing your memories of the events in the novel. So this is a timeline going from chapter 2 in this case all the way through to chapter 10, where each stage considers the significance of the beast. Okay, so if you have a look at chapter 2, the very first box on the timeline, a boy whispers to Piggy, and Piggy tells everyone what the boy said. So it's the moment that those hushed tones convey the idea of the beastie or a snake thing. Something that the older boys dismiss, but the younger boys feel that they have seen, and it's very, very scary for them. In terms of significance, well, we know that there are connotations to the language that's used here, the beastie and the snake thing. We know that in chapter 2 as well, we have a fire, a huge fire that breaks out that is compared to a snake. We know that contextually the snake is the devil in the Garden of Eden, the source of temptation, but fire also, on the flip side, represents this knowledge. So is Golding saying here that knowledge is in fact a double-edged sword, and perhaps what's on the surface in these early chapters is not always what it seems? And of course we see that with the characters themselves. We see how the surface of these characters and the way they're presented is not exactly what it seems, and what's lurking underneath can be much darker. So the beastie and the snake thing, these are all coiled up in this idea of something much darker being on its way as we progress through the novel. The remaining boxes in this timeline talk you through different instances where the beast turns up in the novel as it progresses through to many different forms. As I said, this timeline is something that you can go back through and use as a revision tool. Okay, so rather than me talk through each of the stages today, you should go through and consider the question, what's the significance of the beast in each of these events, in each of these chapters? And it's not an exhaustive list. There'll be more events, there'll be your own ideas that you can add to these, and it would be really useful if you could back up some of those ideas and events with short quotations to make sure that you've really developed your ideas of how the beast is significant in these different areas. So hopefully some more information for the beast for you. We've spoken a lot about how the beast is an ever-changing symbol, and so it begins and it progresses into lots of different things. We can see here the beast begins in the boy's imagination. It starts off as a very childish fear, a typical fear, and something that's really part of their experience, their early experience on the island, because it's a snake-type animal that they think disguises itself in the jungle vines. That is something that shows they are reacting to their environment in the early stages. However, as time goes on, we see the boys in multiple ways. We see that they start to lose their grip on civilization and start to lose their understanding of the world they left behind. And so that manifests itself in their fears for the beast. They consider lots of possibilities, from a creature that rises from the sea to a vague entity of a ghost. There are lots of conflicting theories, and it's a source of division that continues through the novel. When they then, Sam and Eric, spot the dead pilot who's landed on the mountain in chapter 6, the boys get that proof that they needed, that there is something physical to fear, and they have a threat, a real physical threat, or another physical threat on the island. In fact, a beast doesn't roam the island, and we are aware of that as the reader, but it's in the boy's imagination, and that's enough to spark such division, such conflict, and such darkness that comes out from those fears and anxieties. We can see in the chapter 2 quotation here, so going back to point 1, when it was just budding in the boys' imaginations as something childlike, something scary, something typical of nightmares. He says he saw the beastie, the snake thing, and we see that the response is, but there can't be a beastie, as they still grip onto things they know from the society they left behind. That a beastie, like a monster, can't be real. And yet, even at that point, the quotation tells us there was no laughter at all now, and more grave watching. So we've got to appreciate the setting that Golding has created here. These are young boys. This is chapter 2, early on in the novel, and they are already questioning their views that they have been given by their parents, by society at home. They are already doubting their beliefs with this new threat that emerges in the form of this beast. We've already said the beast is a symbol of the evil beast-like qualities inside the boys, and we know as the readers that it's not a real thing, but that fear becomes something physical to them, whether that's the parachutist that they're mistaken it for, whether that's the sow's head that Simon speaks to. It becomes something much more real, and regardless of what physical form it takes or what imagined form it takes for the boys, Golding shows us how that fear of something can bring out evil within. Okay, we then see in this quotation, so jumping forward a bit, we see in chapter 8, fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill. I'm part of you. Now, of course, this quotation comes from that rather bizarre conversation that hallucination that Simon has with the sow's head that becomes the Lord of the Flies, that becomes this new evolution of the beast. We see the Lord of the Flies words confirm what Simon speculates at in chapter 5. We'll talk about Simon briefly in the next slide, but we know all along that Simon can see and can think more deeply than the other boys, and see or think more deeply than perhaps his age would usually allow him to. And so we see him speculate in chapter 5, maybe it's only us, maybe the beast isn't something to fear, it's something inside of us. But the Lord of the Flies words confirm that, whilst they also bring out an even more realised fear. We see that in the language that the creature, the sow's head, seems to speak to Simon with, this grotesque language and bizarre use of the boys' slang. I'm the reason why it's no go. This creature, Golding makes appear hideous, devilish. It taunts Simon. It taunts him almost like he is one of the other boys. Now, of course, if we know the beast is is a manifestation of the boys' fear, it makes sense that it sounds like it's coming from the boys themselves. Thinking about Beast and Simon more closely, we know that Simon is a pretty useful symbolic character in the novel on his own. And so that conversation in chapter 8, that moment that Simon has with the Lord of the Flies, the sow's head that he sees in the clearing in the jungle, that is a moment where we see the first character in the novel realise what the beast is to the boys beyond just a figure of fear. Okay, we see that he recognises something that the other boys just cannot manage to do. So we see that Simon's been laughed off before, but his words are now central to Golding's main point that maybe innate human evil exists, maybe in that quotation, maybe it's only us. Simon doesn't fully understand his own idea when he says it in chapter 5, but by chapter 8 we see Simon with this vision. We see him able to confront the Lord of the Flies and see that actually what he thought was true, even though he couldn't fully put it into words. We see that with the hesitation in the chapter 5 quotation. He couldn't put it more succinctly than maybe it's only us. We see him get that realisation in chapter 8 in front of the sow's head. Okay, so remember that there is a lot more that can be done with the symbol of the beast, and use that timeline to go back through and pick out even more details than we've managed to cover today. But moving on to the conch, we know, of course, that is another incredibly important symbol. And again, possible questions are on the slide now. So these are exam questions that have been taken to show you how it could be phrased in the exam itself. What's the importance of the conch? How does Golding use the conch to explore ideas about civilization? And how does Golding use the conch to explore ideas about society? So we know from those key words that the conch is mixed up interchangeably with civilization and with society. The conch is a huge symbol to the boys themselves, and of course a very important symbol to us readers. Again, we've got a timeline for you to go through, so right from chapter 1, because the conch becomes important from the very beginning, all the way through to chapter 11 when it is destroyed in a particularly dramatic way. So again, I'm not going to go through all of these stages. That's for you to look at and to pick out what is the significance of the conch in each stage. And we'll draw out a few of the points in the next few slides. I think it's really, really useful when we look at this particular symbol to look at it in terms of characters, because the conch is a symbol, but it is an object. It's a physical object that we have in the novel. Remember that symbols don't have to just be objects. They can be characters, they can be repeated events, they can even be colours. Okay, so they can be things that are really abstract as well as things that are really physical, as we saw with the beast. The conch is a really physical thing. It's something that Ralph spots. It's something that Piggy knows to pick up and to blow or create noise. And so the object itself doesn't hold much power on its own. It's what the characters give it that create the power and create such dramatic consequences as the plot unfolds. So if we think about the conch, we have to think about Ralph, absolutely. And I'm sure you can already think about other characters that we would need to look at when looking at this particular symbol. Ralph, absolutely, first of all. So as a representative of law and order, the conch helps Ralph get elected. Okay, Ralph, we already know from character descriptions early in the novel, Ralph is predisposed, we could say, to being a leader. He's confident, he's attractive. We have that that physical understanding of Ralph as a leader, but the conch ultimately helps Ralph to be elected. We see that in the quotation. The being that had blown that had sat waiting for them on the platform with the delicate thing balanced on his knees was set apart. So in this fledgling society that they attempt to create in the very early stages of the novel, we see that Conch enables Ralph to be set apart. And so for that reason has a great deal of importance in terms of establishing their version of law and order early in the novel. We see that in multiple quotations, but there was a stillness about Ralph as he sat that marked him out. There was his size and attractive appearance, and most obscurely, yet most powerfully, there was the conch. So that quotation sums up what I was just saying. Ralph is someone who is largely predisposed to be given that role because of the way he looks and his manner, but it is mostly in that moment because of him holding that object. And then we see, and we can track this, it's a really useful way of tracking character and tracking symbol through the plot. We see that Ralph learns as we go through that the conch cannot be as important all of the time. When he realises that if he blows the conch and they don't come back, then that will be the end of things for their budding civilization. He realises that actually the conch doesn't hold much power on its own, and if he doesn't feel powerful using it, then that power diminishes quite rapidly. Okay, so in terms of character, as you should already have guessed, if we're thinking about Ralph and the conch, we also need to think about Jack and the conch. They are, of course, largely two ends of the spectrum when we consider how they are and their mannerisms, their appearance and so on. But we also see that both of them have this need to have the conch around. So even Jack, with everything that we could say about Jack, he respects the conch. After he fails in several ways to try and gain control, he still treats that conch with great care. So we see that in that quotation, and he still lays the conch with great care in the grass at his feet. We then see also, we need to talk about Piggy when we talk about the conch, because even though it's clearly associated with Ralph, it's also very much associated with Piggy. We have to remember that in chapter 1, Piggy's the one who recognises it. So Ralph spots it, but Piggy recognises its value, knows how to get the noise from it. And he's actually the one that stays kind of steadfast in his mission to keep the conch as a powerful symbol within the group. And of course, in chapter 11, they are both destroyed at the same time, a pivotal moment in terms of the descent into savagery for the rest of the boys. So it's really useful in terms of mind map revision technique that you might want to do to look at characters and their response to a symbol like the conch. I thought it'd be interesting to look at these two quotations as well, because the conch as I said before, also reminds us that the tools of power are in themselves, excuse me, in themselves not that important, okay? Crowns and flags, objects such as those are no more meaningful than this random shell that Ralph spots. And it is essentially just that, it's a shell. It's the meaning people then give it that matters. Piggy's the first because he recognises what it can do, but then all of the characters in their own way follow and give it that meaning, even just for a short time. So we can see it really clearly in these two quotations when Piggy says, we can use this to call the others, have a meeting, they'll come when they hear us. Right at the beginning of the novel, the conch holds this possibility to unite the boys, to create something, and to bring some of the rules and the order of their old lives into this new world that they have landed in. And then, using that very short quotation from chapter 11, we see how the conch becomes not only a source of conflict, but eventually it becomes something that has to be destroyed. The conch exploded into 1,000 white fragments and ceased to exist. The fact that Piggy dies at the same point is, of course, hugely symbolic. The fact that the language used here, that it doesn't just break as an object might, that it explodes, that metaphorical language there to hammer home the point of how important the conch was to the boys, and just as much how meaningless it can become. Okay, the final symbol that we're going to look at today is physical appearance. So again, questions linked to physical appearance. What is the importance of the boys' appearance in Lord of the Flies? And of course, we've got an image there of the boys not wearing very much, so we need to track how their physical appearance changes from clothing to very little, as well as taking on the use of weapons with their spears, and by covering themselves in war paint. How does Golding use the boys' clothing to explore ideas about civilization? And how does Golding use the boys' hair to explore ideas about society? So you can see from those questions that physical appearance does come up in the exam in different ways. And regardless of what words specifically are used in the question, you know, if you've done your revision of the importance of physical appearance during that novel, you can talk about whatever aspect comes up in the exam question itself. Here we've got another timeline for you to use, and again, make sure that you go through each stage and question what's the significance of, in this case, quotations. So for each stage there is a quotation, far too long of course for you to memorise, but look at that moment in the novel and pick out what is useful in terms of evidence, but also what's the significance. Golding uses appearance to highlight a transition from civilization into savagery. In a sense, that's what he's doing with every symbol, and that's why it's such a good revision tool, because you'll be able to mark a transition from one state at the beginning to another entirely different state at the end of the novel by looking at how the boys' interaction with the symbol changes. With physical appearance, of course, it's part of the boys, very much so. It's their hair, it's their clothing, it's whatever they put on their faces, it's whatever they hold in their hands as weapons. And so to look at each stage is important to ask yourselves what changes and why, okay, and how does that mark a transition into savagery. I think it's important when you're thinking about physical appearance to remember how they arrived on the island. Not all of them were fully clothed at the beginning because they had been through an ordeal, and they were in a very new environment that didn't require the kind of clothing. But clothing can also have this ominous and foreboding, foreshadowing even, effect on allowing us to see what the characters are and what they may become. We saw Jack and his choir, even though many had discarded their clothes, Jack and his choir arriving onto the platform as one long dark creature travelling in a pack wearing their black choir robes. You can see in the image from a film version of the text how out of place these boys looked as they arrived. But we see through Jack's treatment of the boys shortly after that they were clearly being forced to wear these cumbersome outfits because Jack was leading their pack at this stage. We see that quotations, they're more or less dressed in school uniforms, grey, blue, fawn, jacketed or jersey. We see that as a clear signal of the civilization they have come from. But of course, the boys' changing appearance symbolises that passage of time, and they do change so very quickly. Jack himself leading the charge in this this dark creature that they arrive in their robes. We see him quickly discard them and become something much less civilized, much more savage. Physical appearance, again, there's a really nice contrast that we can make between Ralph and Jack. So again, a symbol can help you explore a character and look at the meaning behind those characters in the novel. So as their appearance changes, their behaviour changes with it, but in very different ways. So the contrast between Jack and Ralph here, we see this most clearly with Jack. He's the first to adopt a mask as a way of camouflage, and most of Jack's savage moments coincide with descriptions of his lack of clothing. We'll have a look at those first. So we've got a sharpened stick about 5 feet long trailed from his right hand, and except for a pair of tattered shorts held up by his knife belt, he was naked. So we see that from chapter 3, very, very soon after he arrives in those black, long choir robes. We see him fully embracing the environment around him and fully embracing this change to his physical appearance. He has a weapon, this sharpened stick. He has very little clothing at all. And what he does have on is tattered. And we have this knife belt, this reference to weaponry again. We also see him hide his face through clay, through soil that he finds, but we also see him create something more symbolic. We create this mask, a thing on its own behind which Jack hid, which could liberate him from previous shame and from self-consciousness of the society he left behind. In contrast, we see Ralph become conscious of his clothes in a similar way to the other boys, become aware of the needlessness of those clothes in the new environment, but we also see how Ralph struggles with the change to his physical appearance. Okay, in the quotation, how much he disliked the dirt and decay, how much he was constantly flicking the tangled hair out of his eyes. What we see in Ralph and Jack is that physical appearance changes for both of them inevitably because of the environment they're in, but because of their presentation in the novel, they're different, they're contrasting natures. One copes with it very well and adapts to it and changes with it, but for Ralph, he struggles with it all of the way through. Finally, I thought this quotation for Jack was quite apt, because at the end of the novel we are reminded of just who Jack was and how, even though physical appearance changed him and his exterior, inside he was still just that little boy. So when the naval officer arrives to pick them up, he is a little boy wearing the remains of an extraordinary black cap on his red hair. Okay, so what we're reminded of is how little they have actually changed, even though everything around them has changed so absolutely. Right, thank you for listening today, Year 11. I hope that you have learned something new or refreshed your memory of something for each of the symbols. But remember that that is not an exhaustive list. There are more than just those 3 symbols. And on the slide now you can see there are many other ways that you can access symbols in Lord of the Flies, and through the symbols many ways that you can access your revision. Okay, so please don't think that the only way to revise is to go back through the novel and read huge chunks at a time, because that might not be the best way to revise for you. Look at symbols, look at characters, look at themes, and use that timeline idea, if you want, to track the progression of a particular thing, whether that's a symbol or a character or so on, and see it as a transition from one state into another. Remember that Golding uses these symbols to hide, to explore the deeper meanings of the novel. So by doing that work on symbols, you are really getting to grips with Golding's intentions when writing Lord of the Flies. Okay guys, best of luck, and make sure that you do have a look over those timelines again to make the best use of your revision. Okay, thank you.